The BFUWI is extremely privileged to have such an accomplished and relevant panel, and we're delighted to be able to present the opportunity to hear their views and to share them with you today.
I want to focus on three main aspects. The first has to do with evidence and the quality of evidence that's used to inform policy decision. Next area that I'm interested in has to do with the extent to which Caribbean countries have a measurable outcome. So yes, we know that the debt to GDP ratio is extremely high. For some countries, it's as high as 145%, Jamaica for example. So we know that it has a crippling effect. The third big area that I want to focus on throughout the hour looks at the extent to which there are opportunities for a joined up approach throughout the Caribbean, as against countries going it alone.
It is true that you have a model based very largely on tourism and tourism-related services, which seems to have run out of steam. So it's not surprising, really, that if you look at the Caribbean share of world travel, it is declining.
If we perhaps look at areas like the natural environment and look at the extent to which all the Caribbean islands have shared geographic similarities. So yes, we're all a small size, but there are also other characteristics by virtue of our geography, which means that we are prone to natural disasters. And it only takes one natural disaster to wipe out any gains that have made in terms of development progress. And of course, for most of us, we're probably thinking of the recent event in Haiti.
Some of the areas where things are likely to grow very quickly are in the services area, but actually are in the creative arts, in sports and leisure. And again, those are things where we as a region arguably have a competitive advantage. I mean, if you think of Rihanna as an individual performer, I actually look at her as a business. If she was a capitalized company, she's most probably in the last 10 years created more wealth than lots of our companies in the region. And I think I'm using that as a kind of extreme example to say I think there are real opportunities. We do need to address the change in the remittances and look how we engage with the second diaspora, generation of diaspora better. But I'm hopeful because I think this turbulence is something that we always have as part of our life in the Caribbean, and I think we adapt to it well.
How can you convince me that the Caribbean region that's over-reliant on remittances will not die in the next 30 years or so?
You're quite right. If a society became more and more dependent on remittances, it would be probably a sign of weakness rather than a sign of strength. But I don't think the level per se matters so much. I mean, the Dominican Republic depends more on remittances than any of the English-speaking islands, but it's not necessarily a disaster for the Dominican Republic. On the contrary, actually, in that country, there's some evidence that remittances are used to go into small-scale investment and so on. So I think that what matters is very much the trend over time. If in 20 years' time, Jamaica, say, is more dependent on remittances than it is today, that's a very bad sign. I would agree with you.
Some remittance actually go for family members helping others to set up businesses, and whatever it is, and that then stimulates the economy. But even though the remittance that goes to Jamaica in particular is for consumer effect, because they're buying, it is therefore stimulating the economy of the country. But what we find is a lot of that remittance is spent on foreign goods. So effectively it's stimulating the economy to a certain extent, and thereafter it leaves and come back. So that's sort of our experience.
Are we actually saying that the microeconomics that could be developed from remittances would be sufficient to get beyond individual Caribbean countries' capacity to export, which has historically been restricted by the funding arrangements surrounding lending by World Bank, IMF, etc.
The issues of governance and how the societies have governed themselves over, I'd say, 2 generations now, which have resulted in where we are. And I think that's the root cause. Transparency International published their ratings, okay? And going forward, Transparency International's rating of a country is going to be as equally as important as a Moody's rating as whether people are going to invest in your country for a variety of reasons. And so it's governance as much as those other things which I think really matter.
If you want a new outcome, then you probably need to change behavior. So how do you change behavior? You have to have a good understanding of what incentives drive one type of behavior as against another. And that again comes down to, well, what sort of research has been done? What sort of evidence do you have about what works under different conditions? You mentioned that individuals choose to do one thing as against another. Would they perhaps choose to bank if there were perhaps, I don't know, favorable interest rates, or there was some favorable return that outweighed the current consumption?
But Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, thank you so much for attending today. Thank you to our speakers, and I should say particularly to Alan's wife for all of her research. Thanks to our moderator, Vanessa. And thank you to all of you for attending, for your enthusiasm and support, and for your thought-provoking questions. Thank you particularly to Dr. Kate Quinn for putting up with various loud emails from me from time to time, and for the generosity of UCL allowing us not only to come here but to put up our banner advertising our desire to steal their students. I think that shows an open mind and a bravery to boot.